During my lunch break, a coworker leaned over to look at the new watch my husband had given me. "Fiona, why does the screw on the back of this watch look like it's been messed with?" My stomach dropped. I grabbed a small precision tool from my desk and carefully unscrewed the back plate. Inside was a micro GPS tracker. My mind raced, flashing back to all the times Jared had called me lately, during my shifts, always saying, "I love you, babe," with a strange, frantic intensity. Yet when I came home, he wouldn't let me near him. I threw the watch into my desk drawer, grabbed my car keys, and bolted out of the office. I slammed my foot on the gas. The world blurred outside the windows as my car tore down the road. The only thing spinning in my head was the image of that tracker. I screeched to a halt in front of our apartment building, threw the car into park, and rushed through the lobby. I pressed the elevator button repeatedly, my heart hammering against my ribs. The doors slid shut, lifting me to the 17th floor. The moment they cracked open, I squeezed through and ran down the hallway to our door. I pounded on the wood with everything I had. "Jared, open the door." Silence. "Open up, Jared. I know you're in there," I screamed, throwing my fists against the door. After what felt like an eternity, the door finally opened, a fraction of an inch. Jared stood there in his silk robe, his hair slightly disheveled, his cheeks flushed a deep, guilty pink. "Fiona, what are you doing back? Did something happen?" He gripped the doorknob, blocking the entryway. I shoved past him and stormed inside. Living room looked exactly as I had left it this morning. "Are you out of your mind, Fiona?" Jared yelled from behind me. I ignored him and marched straight into our bedroom. I ripped the comforter off the bed. Empty. I pulled open the closet doors, then dropped to my knees to look underneath the bed frame. "What are you looking for?" he asked, trailing after me, his voice trembling. I spun around and ran into the master bathroom, ripping open the shower curtain. "Nothing. What is wrong with you? Did something go wrong at work? You're scaring me." Jared reached out and grabbed my arm. His hand was ice cold. I flung his hand off. "Where is she?" Jared's face went entirely pale. "Who? What are you talking about?" Suddenly, a muffled commotion rose from the street below. There were shouts, followed by a man's sharp scream. "She jumped." Someone fell from the balcony. I think it was the 17th floor. I froze. The 17th floor? Our floor. I lunged toward the bedroom window. "Don't look." Jared threw himself in front of me, spreading his arms to block my path. "Fiona, please don't look." His face was white, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "Get out of my way," I said, staring him down. "I don't want you to see it. You'll have nightmares." He wept, shaking his head, refusing to budge. The more he resisted, the more I needed to see. I shoved him hard against the wall. He let out a muffled grunt, his knees buckling as he slid down to the floor. I leaned out the window, looking down on the grass below. A few neighbors had gathered, pointing up at our building, but the lawn was empty. There was no blood, no body, no ambulance. An older woman called out, "Where did she go? Weren't she hanging from the ledge just a second ago?" Another woman replied, "You must be seeing things. There's no one there. Let's go inside." The crowd slowly began to disperse. I pulled my head back in, suddenly drained of all strength. I turned around and looked at Jared, who was slumped against the wall. On his face was an unmistakable, sickening look of relief. I walked over to him. "Where is she?" He lowered his head. I knelt, grabbing his jaw, forcing his face up. "I asked you a question. Who was at that window?" Jared shudders and tries to look away. "Who? Fiona? I don't know what you're talking about." "You pushed me. It hurts," whimpered, tears welling in his eyes. I leaned in close. "You weren't afraid I'd get nightmares from a body. You were afraid I'd catch her. Do you know what your face looked like when I turned around? Relief. You were relieved she got away? Relieved I didn't catch her. Do you think I'm blind?" My voice was quiet, but every word cut like a razor. Jared looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "Relief, Fiona. I'm relieved my wife isn't losing her mind. I'm relieved our home isn't ruined by some freak accident." Scrambled up, pulling himself up by the wall, pointing at the messy bedroom. "Look at what you just did. Barging in, screaming, tearing the place apart. You don't trust me? Is this what our marriage is to you?" His voice was high-pitched, dripping with defensive indignation. If it weren't for the tracker sitting in my desk drawer, I might have actually believed I was the crazy one. I stood up, pulled out my phone, and brought up the photo of the tracker, holding it right in front of his face. "And what about this, Jared? Explain this to me." The glow of the screen hit his face, and his features instantly drained of color. His lips parted, but no sound came out. I expected a confession, but instead he burst into tears. Thick, heavy tears rolled down his cheeks. I was worried about you," he cried, his voice cracking. "You've been working late every single night, coming home and barely saying a word. I call you, and you don't answer. I was terrified something would happen to you. What was I supposed to do? I just wanted to know you were safe. Is it a crime to love you, Fiona? Is loving my wife a mistake? He wept, turning himself into the victim so flawlessly it made my stomach turn. I grabbed his wrist. It was freezing. So because you were worried about me, a woman had to dangle from our 17th floor window? Stop it, he screamed, ripping his hand away. You just want to believe I did something wrong. You want to ruin us. He stumbled back and grabbed his phone from the coffee table. Fine. You want to play this game? I'll call my parents. I'll let them hear exactly how their perfect daughter-in-law is tearing their son apart over nothing. He unlocked the phone, his thumb hovering over his contacts. My head throbbed. I knew he'd do it. If his parents showed up, they'd only see a trembling, weeping son and a frantic, erratic wife. No one would believe me. I would be the villain who broke a good man's heart. The fight drained out of me all at once. Don't call them. My voice was dry, hollow. Jared stared at me, tears streaming, his finger poised over his father's name. I closed my eyes, then opened them. I'm sorry. The words were like ash in my mouth. I've been under too much pressure at work. I lost control. I'm sorry. Jared, sobbing, slowed. He studied me for a few agonizing seconds, making sure I'm not mocking him, before slowly lowering the phone. Stepped closer and took my hand. I know you're tired, sweetie. I don't blame you. His hand was still cold, but his voice was a soothing, gentle purr. Just don't scare me like that again, okay? I looked at his tear-stained face and nodded. Okay. He smiled a soft, triumphant smile of pure relief. I felt a deep, icy chill settle in my bones. The next morning, Jared was still asleep, resting peacefully with a faint, content smile on his lips. Yesterday felt like a fever dream. I made breakfast as usual, ate alone, and walked out the door. But the moment the front door clicked shut, I slipped into the stairwell and called my coworker, Megan, to take a personal day. I waited until I heard the hum of the elevator going down. Then, quiet as a ghost, I unlocked our front door and stepped back inside. While he was still asleep, I quickly and discreetly installed tiny cameras in a few blind spots around the apartment. For the next few days, I spent my working hours sitting in the coffee shop downstairs, my eyes glued to the live feed on my phone. On screen, he didn't do his usual workouts or watch TV. By midday, he'd be curled up on the sofa, texting furiously. Fingers flew across the screen. His mouth curled into the goofy, love-struck grin of a teenager in the honeymoon phase. Watching it, I felt like the air was being squeezed out of my lungs. At exactly 6 in the evening, I walked through the door. Welcome home, babe, he said, jogging over to take my bag, wrapping his arms around me. After dinner, he went to take a shower, listening to the rushing water. I walked over to the sofa and picked up his phone. I used his passcode and opened his messages. The chat list was pristine. Aside from work channels and group chats with his buddies, the active conversation from this afternoon had been scrubbed clean. I stared at the blank screen, my blood running cold. Without a word, I slid the phone back into place. 2 days later, in the dead of night, the silence finally drove me mad. I lay in bed, eyes closed, pretending to sleep, but my mind was spinning. At 1 a.m., the mattress shifted. Jared pulled the comforter back and slipped out of bed barefoot. He padded out of the room and into the master bathroom, closing the door behind him. Soon the faucet was running. The rush of water was loud enough to drown out a whisper, but the tiny microphone I had hidden beneath the vanity caught every single syllable, feeding it directly into the earbud in my left ear. Hey, sweetheart, I miss you, too. His voice was pitched low, thick with a sweet, clinging affection I hadn't heard in years. I know, but she's like clockwork. Home every day, sitting there like a lump of wood. It's exhausting. Just looking at her. The voice on the other end mumbled something, and he let out a soft chuckle. All right, let's wait until the weekend. I'll tell her I'm going out with the guys, and then I'm all yours. In the dark, I stuffed the corner of the comforter into my mouth to muffle my sobs. Tears soaked into the pillow. Every word felt like a physical blow to my chest. So that's what I was to him. A boring piece of wood he had to tolerate. The weekend arrived. The city was alive with couples holding hands, enjoying the spring air. Jared spent the morning preening in front of the mirror. He wore a brand new designer shirt I've never seen before, and groomed his hair to perfection. As he headed for the door, he grabbed a sleek brand new leather bag. Babe, he said, leaning in to press a quick kiss to my cheek. I'm heading out with the guys. Might be a bit late tonight. I looked at his handsome, sculpted face, feeling nothing but a wave of nausea. Sure. I forced a smile. Have fun. His eyes crinkled with delight. Thanks, babe. The moment he stepped out of the building, I pulled my baseball cap low and followed him down. I slipped into my car parked across the street. He didn't head for the subway. Instead, he lingered on the curb, checking his phone. Within minutes, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up beside him. The door swung open, and he slid into the passenger seat. Before the car even pulls away, the woman in the driver's seat leaned over, cupping his face, and kissed him deeply. I turned the key in the ignition and followed them. The Mercedes bypassed the city center, heading straight for the scenic, upscale suburbs of the North Valley. Hands were steady on the steering wheel. Eventually, the car pulled into the grand driveway of the Whispering Pines Resort and Spa. Jared got out, and the woman followed, looping her arm through his. I laughed, sharing some private joke as they strolled into the gilded lobby. I killed the engine, pulled the key, and sat in the quiet of my car. The afternoon sun was blindingly bright. I pulled down the sun visor and retrieved my phone. First, I called my father. Dad, it's me, Fiona. Sweetheart, why are you calling at this hour? Aren't you working? I took a few days off. I wanted to surprise Jared with a little getaway. We're actually up at the Whispering Pines Resort. It's beautiful here. Booked a private dining room for dinner. Why don't you and Mom drive up and join us? Let's have a family dinner. My dad sounded thrilled. Oh, that sounds wonderful, sweetie. Your mother and I will get ready right away. Perfect. I'll text you the reservation details. As soon as I hung up, I dialed my mother-in-law's number. It rings a few times before she picked up. Hello, Fiona? Her voice was sharp, energetic. Hi, Helen. Are you and Arthur home? Yes. We're just watching some TV. Is everything all right? Everything's great. Jared and I are out celebrating, and I booked a gorgeous private room at a restaurant up in the valley. I realized we haven't all sat down for a nice meal in ages. Love it if you and Arthur could join us. Oh, Jared is with you? That boy didn't say a word about a trip. I wanted it to be a surprise. Can you make it? It's not far. The Whispering Pines Resort. Of course we can make it. We'll get ready and head out now. Wait. The room is called the Summit Suite. Just ask the host when you arrive. We'll see you soon, dear. I slid my phone back into my pocket, pushed the car door open, and stepped out into the warm breeze. Entering the lobby, the receptionist greeted me with a polished, professional smile. Welcome. How can I help you today? I have a reservation for the Summit Suite. Fiona Albright. She tapped on her screen. Yes. Mrs. Albright. The room is ready for you in our second-floor dining hall. Thank you. I walked toward the elevators. I remembered exactly where the Mercedes parked, and I knew exactly which direction they went. I stood in the quiet, carpeted hallway of the resort, waiting for my family, waiting for his parents. My parents arrived first. Fiona, have you been waiting long? My mom hugged me, pulling back to look at my face. You look a little thin, sweetie. Are you sleeping? Just busy with the quarterly budget, Mom. I smiled. Dad, let's head up to the room first. A few minutes later, Arthur and Helen arrived. Arthur spotted me immediately. Fiona, where's Jared? I thought you were surprising him. He's upstairs freshening up. You know how he is. Has to make sure every hair is in place before he dines. Helen chuckled. Naturally. It's so sweet of you to plan this, Fiona. I took Arthur's arm. We're family. It's the least I can do. Let's go have some tea in the suite, and then I'll go grab him. The Summit Suite was beautiful, featuring massive, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a serene pine forest. I poured tea for the four of them. Arthur took a sip, then asked, "Which room are you guys staying in?" I'll go nudge him. I'd love to see the suites here, anyway. I set the teapot down, smiling warmly. Actually, Dad, I was thinking we could all go up together and surprise him. He'll be absolutely thrilled to see you both. I stood up. Come on, let's go. They all rose, smiling. The five of us walked out of the private dining room and stepped back into the elevator. On the ride up, Arthur was still singing my praises. Fiona is 1 in a million. Jared is a lucky man to have a wife who cares this much about family. My parents beamed with pride. The elevator chimes opening on the 6th floor. The corridor was long, lined with plush, sound-dampening carpets that swallowed the sound of our footsteps. Ellen whispered, "Which room is it?" "Just down here," I said, pointing toward the end of the hall. We stopped outside room 608. I turned around, putting a finger to my lips with a playful grin. Sure. Big surprise. They all quieted down, their faces bright with anticipation. I raised my hand and knocked 3 times. "Oh, I can't wait to see the look on his face," Helen whispered, her voice a conspiratorial hiss. "He's probably fast asleep, the lazy thing. He always did take the longest naps when he thought no one was watching." "He deserves it," Arthur said, his voice deep and resonant, the voice of a man who believed the world was ordered, just, and entirely under his control. "The boy works hard, but he works too hard. Fiona, you're a saint for putting this together. Truly. I just wanted to make sure we all got what we deserved," I said. My voice was smooth, a perfect imitation of a dutiful wife. My throat felt like it was lined with broken glass, but my face remained a serene, unbothered mask. Inside the room, there was a sudden, sharp rustle, the sound of a glass sliding against stone. A heavy, hurried footstep. Then, the click of the lock. The door swung inward, opening just a few inches at first, repeating the exact pattern from the 17th floor of our apartment. But this time, there was no brass chain to catch it. The door opened wide, and Jared stood in the entryway. He was wearing the brand new, slate gray designer shirt I had seen him preening in front of the mirror with only hours before. The top 3 buttons were undone, revealing the pale, sharp line of his collarbone. His hair, usually styled into a stiff, immovable wave, was damp and slightly disheveled, curling at the temples. His cheeks bore the high, warm flush of a man who had just climbed out of a very warm bed. In his right hand, he held a half-empty flute of champagne, the bubbles still rising in lazy, golden chains. "Babe, did you forget that?" The words died in his throat. His eyes, initially soft and heavy with a lazy, post-coital affection, contracted into twin points of absolute, paralyzing terror. His gaze darted from me to my father, then to my mother, and finally settled on his own parents. The champagne glass in his hand wobbled violently, a few drops of the pale, yellow liquid spilling over his fingers and dripping onto the plush hallway carpet. "Jared," Helen squealed, stepping forward and clapping her hands together. "Surprise, sweetheart. Happy family dinner." Jared did not move. He stood frozen in the doorway, a statue of horror wrapped in expensive Italian cotton. His mouth remained slightly open, his lips parting but producing nothing more than a dry, clicking sound. The flush on his cheeks instantly curdled into a sickly, blotched gray. "Mom," he finally stammers, his voice cracking, climbing into an unnatural, high-pitched register. "Dad? What are you doing here?" "Fiona brought us." Arthur boomed, stepping forward to clap his son on the shoulder. He didn't seem to notice the way Jared flinched away from his touch, or the way his son's knees seemed to tremble beneath his tailored trousers. "She set up a whole private suite downstairs. The Summit Suite. She said you were up here taking a breather, but we couldn't wait. We wanted to drag you down ourselves. Look at you, already dressed for the occasion." I'm not feeling well," Jared stammered. He tried to shift his weight, subtly moving his body to block the narrow view of the foyer behind him. It was the exact same defensive stance he had taken at our apartment door, his knuckles white as he gripped the doorknob. "I have a massive migraine. The light. I was actually just about to lie down." "Fiona, why didn't you tell me? You shouldn't have brought them up here." "A migraine?" My mother frowned, her maternal instincts instantly shifting into a gentle, hovering concern. She took a step closer, peering at his pale face. "But sweetheart, you're dressed up. And is that champagne?" Before Jared could formulate another lie, a voice drifted out from the deeper recesses of the suite. It was a light, melodic voice, carrying the easy, unbothered weight of someone who believed she was entirely safe. "Jared, honey? Did the front desk finally bring up those extra silk pillows? Or is it just the turn-down service? Tell them we don't want to be disturbed until..." The voice cut off abruptly as a figure stepped around the corner of the small entryway foyer. It was Chloe. She was wearing one of the resort's oversized, plush white bathrobes, the belt tied loosely around her waist. Her blonde hair was piled on top of her head in a messy, wet bun, a few damp tendrils clinging to the back of her neck. She was holding a small, silver bowl of fresh strawberries, her fingers stained a faint, sugary red. She stopped dead in her tracks. The silence that fell over the hotel corridor was not merely quiet, it was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. It was the kind of silence that precedes a lightning strike, the air suddenly thick with ozone, and the terrifying weight of a coming storm. Helen's hands dropped slowly to her sides, her fingers dragging against the fabric of her skirt. Arthur's chest remained expanded, frozen mid-breath, his brow furrowing as his eyes slowly traveled from the woman in the bathrobe, to the half-empty champagne glass in his son's hand, and finally to me. My mother let out a sharp, ragged intake of breath, her hand flying to cover her mouth. My father's shoulders squared, his face darkening into a terrifying, stony mask of pure, protective rage. "Jared?" Helen whispered. The word was tiny, fragile, completely devoid of the warmth she had carried only seconds ago. Who is this young lady?" Jared's mind, always so quick to spin a narrative, scrambled for purchase on the sheer cliff of his own ruin. I could see the gears turning behind his frantic, bloodshot eyes. He looked like an animal caught in the high beams of an oncoming truck, paralyzed, yet desperately searching for an escape route that did not exist. "Mom, she's a colleague," Jared stammered, his voice rising in panic. He stepped back into the room, his hands shaking so violently that he finally set the champagne glass down on the entry table with a sharp, clattering chime. "She's from the firm." We're working on the quarterly presentation. The North Valley account. It's a massive project, and we needed a quiet space too. A colleague, I repeated. My voice was very quiet, very calm. It cut through his frantic babble like a scalpel slicing through wet paper. A colleague who shares a single-bed luxury suite with you on a Saturday afternoon? At a resort 3 hours away from your office? A colleague who wears a bathrobe and asks for silk pillows. Fiona, please. Jared cried, taking a step toward me, his hands outstretched in a pleading gesture. You're doing it again. You're having another one of your episodes. You're misinterpreting things. You've been so stressed, so paranoid lately. Mom, Dad, you know how she's been. She's been working late every night. She's been imagining things. I'm not the one imagining things, Jared, I said. I reached into my handbag. Jared flinched, his eyes darting to my hand as if I were about to pull out a weapon. In a way, I was. I pulled out my phone, unlocked the screen, and tapped on a pre-saved audio file. I turned the volume to the maximum and held it out in the space between us. The recording was clear, the tiny microphone I had hidden beneath our bathroom vanity having captured every frequency of his low, conspiratorial whisper. The audio echoed off the hard-tiled foyer of room 608. Hey, sweetheart, I miss you too. I know, but she's like clockwork. Home every day, sitting there like a lump of wood. It's exhausting. Just looking at her. Jared's face went entirely white. The remaining color drained from his lips, leaving them a dry, pale gray. He stared at the phone in my hand, as if it were a live grenade. The recording continued, mercilessly filling the silence. All right, let's wait until the weekend. I'll tell her I'm going out with the guys, and then I'm all yours. You miserable, spineless bastard, my father growled. He took a heavy step into the room, his chest heaving. My mother held him back, her own tears finally spilling over her eyelashes, her face a mixture of heartbreak and fury. But it was Arthur who moved first. The patriarch, the man who had spent his entire life cultivating a pristine family legacy, stepped past my father. He stood directly in front of his son. Arthur was a tall man, but in that moment, he seemed to tower over Jared like an impending avalanche. Is this your work? Arthur asked. His voice was dangerously low, vibrating with a quiet, lethal rumble. Is this the overtime you've been pulling? Dad, no. You don't understand. Jared wept. The tears came instantly, a torrent of desperate, pathetic weeping that he had used so many times before to disarm me. He dropped to his knees on the carpet, reaching out to grab the hem of his father's trousers. She set me up. Fiona spliced those tapes. She's been spying on me. She's been putting cameras in our home. She's mentally unstable, Dad. She's trying to destroy our family because she can't handle her own stress. You have to believe me. Oh, I believe you've been watched, Jared, I said, stepping fully into the suite. I didn't look at him. I looked past him, at Chloe, who was shrinking back against the wall of the bedroom, her eyes wide with terror, her knuckles white as she clutched the lapels of the resort robe. Hello, Chloe, I said, my tone almost conversational. Or should I call you the woman who fell from the 17th floor? Chloe let out a small, terrified gasp. She looked at Jared, then at Arthur, who was staring at her with cold, unblinking eyes. I don't know what you're talking about, she whispered, though her voice lacked any conviction. She looked like she wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. Let's talk about Tuesday afternoon, I said, walking slowly toward the center of the room. The suite was beautiful, dominated by a massive king-sized bed with rumpled sheets, a half-empty bottle of expensive champagne chilling in a silver bucket, and 2 plush armchairs overlooking the pine forest below. My husband has been very busy over the last few months. Not just with you, Chloe, but with a very specific, very detailed plan. I turned back to face the parents, who had now all stepped into the room, closing the door behind them. The space felt small, tight, like a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. For nearly 6 months, Jared has been dropping subtle, careful hints to all of you. I began, my voice steady, carrying the weight of absolute certainty. He'd call my mother and ask if I seemed forgetful. He'd tell Arthur that the stress of my corporate financial management job was making me erratic. He'd call me during my shifts, sobbing, telling me how worried he was about my mental health. He put a precision GPS tracker in the watch he gave me, not because he was jealous, but because he needed to establish a paper trail of my location, and more importantly, he wanted to drive me to the brink of a nervous breakdown. Fiona, Helen whispered, her hand trembling against her mouth. What are you saying? I'm saying that Jared was building a narrative, I said, looking down at my husband, who was still slumped on the floor, his shoulders shaking with silent, pathetic sobs. He wanted everyone to believe I was losing my mind. He wanted my parents, his parents, and my employers to believe that Fiona Albright was paranoid, unstable, and deeply suicidal. Because if a woman who is publicly known to have a history of mental breakdowns suddenly falls from the 17th floor balcony of her apartment, No one asks questions. The police write it off as a tragic suicide. The grieving husband gets the sympathy, the freedom, and the estate. My God. My mother breathed, her knees buckling slightly. My father caught her, his eyes burning as he stared at the back of Jared's head. But we had a small hiccup on Tuesday, I continued, taking a step toward Jared. I came home early. Chloe was in our apartment. When I pounded on the door, she couldn't run down the hallway because I was standing there. So Jared had her climb out of the bedroom window onto the 17th floor balcony. But she couldn't stay there. If I looked out the window, I'd see her. So she climbed down. I looked at Chloe. Our building has a staggered architectural design. The 16th floor balcony directly below ours belongs to an apartment owned by an elderly man who has been in a nursing home for the last 6 months. Jared is on the building's HOA board. He has the master keys for emergency maintenance. Chloe didn't jump to her death. She dropped down to the 16th floor balcony, unlocked the sliding door with a key Jared gave her, and slipped inside. The puzzle pieces, which had felt so chaotic and terrifying on Tuesday, finally fell into a perfect, chilling pattern. The crowd below saw a woman hanging from the ledge for a split second before she dropped, I said. They thought they were seeing things because by the time they looked closely, the balcony was empty. And when I looked out the window, Jared was relieved. Not because he was glad I didn't see a body. He was relieved because his mistress had successfully made it into the vacant 16th floor apartment without being caught. You're insane, Jared whispered from the floor. He slowly looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen, his face a mask of desperate, ugly hatred. You can't prove any of this. It's a conspiracy theory. It's the delusions of a crazy woman. Dad, please. She's making it up. She has no proof. Actually, Jared, I said, reaching back into my bag.
Ida.
I pulled out a thick, white envelope and tossed it onto the glass coffee table. It landed with a sharp slap, sliding across the surface until it tapped against the silver ice bucket. Go ahead, Arthur, I said gently. Open it. Arthur stepped forward, his large, calloused hand reaching down to pick up the envelope. He pulled out the stack of document printouts inside. As a retired corporate executive, Arthur knew how to read a balance sheet. I watched his eyes scan the pages, watching the way his jaw tightened, the skin around his knuckles turning white as he turned page after page. What is this, Arthur? Helen asked, her voice cracking with fear. It's a record of forensic accounting, I explained, my voice cold and dry. Over the last 4 months, someone has been systematically accessing my corporate credentials. I am a financial manager for a multi-million-dollar estate firm. I carry a hardware security token on my keyring. Jared has been using a keylogger he installed on my work laptop, under the pretense of cleaning up my operating system, to copy my passwords and access codes. He's been transferring corporate client funds, in small, undetectable increments, into an offshore shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. I looked down at Jared, whose breath had completely hitched. The shell company, I said, is registered under 2 names, Jared Dean and Chloe Vance. Jared. Arthur's voice was barely a whisper now, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. You stole from her firm? You used her name? He didn't just steal from them, Arthur, I said. He was setting up the grand finale. The plan was brilliant, really. If I jumped from the 17th floor, the corporate theft would be discovered shortly after my death. The police would find a keylogger on my laptop, but Jared would claim I was the one who installed it to hide my tracks. The narrative would be complete. Fiona Albright, driven mad by her own greed and corporate embezzlement, took her own life when she realized the walls were closing in. Jared would be the innocent, grieving victim, left with a massive life insurance payout and millions of dollars waiting for him in the Caymans. No, please. Chloe sobbed, dropping to her knees by the armchair. I didn't know about the murder. I swear to God, I didn't know. He told me she was crazy. He told me she was going to ruin him, that she was abusive. He said we were just taking the money and leaving. I didn't know he wanted to kill her. Chloe, shut up. Jared screamed, throwing himself toward her. But my father stepped in, his heavy boot blocking Jared's path, forcing him back onto the carpet. Don't you dare touch her, my father growled, his voice thick with a father's protective rage. Don't you dare move a single inch. Helen looked at her son, as if he were a monster pulled from the depths of the ocean. The maternal warmth that had defined her for his entire life was completely gone, replaced by a cold, hollow disgust. You planned to kill her, Helen whispered, her voice shaking. Our Fiona, the girl who took care of you when you had surgery. The girl who hosted our anniversaries. You are no son of mine. Mom, please. Jared cried, reaching his hands out, his voice cracking into a desperate, pathetic wail. She's lying. She manipulated the records. I love you, Mom. Please, don't let her do this to me. I didn't do this to you, Jared, I said, looking down at his weeping, disheveled form. You did this to yourself. I walked over to the door of the suite and pulled it open. The corridor, which had been so quiet and empty, was no longer vacant. Standing in the hallway were two men in dark, tailored suits, accompanied by two uniformed officers from the State Police Division. One of the men in suits was Detective Miller, whom I had spent the last 3 days coordinating with, providing him with every scrap of digital evidence, keylogger logs, and the physical GPS tracker from my watch. "Detective," I said, stepping aside to let them enter. "He's all yours." The officers moved with a quiet, practiced efficiency. They stepped into the plush room, their heavy boots contrasting sharply with the luxury of the suite. Jared scrambled backward on the carpet, his back hitting the base of the bed. "No. Get away from me. There's been a mistake. My wife is crazy. She's framing me." "Jared Dean," Detective Miller said, pulling a pair of heavy, steel handcuffs from his belt. "You are under arrest for grand larceny, corporate espionage, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit murder. You have the right to remain silent." The officer grabbed Jared by his arm, pulling him up from the floor with a blunt, unyielding force. Jared's designer shirt caught on the bedpost, the fabric ripping with a sharp, tearing sound. He screamed, a high-pitched, childish sound of pure terror, as his wrists were pulled behind his back and the metal cuffs snapped shut with a definitive, heavy click. "Chloe Vance," the second officer said, turning to Chloe, who was curled into a ball on the floor, weeping hysterically into her hands. "You are under arrest as an accomplice to grand larceny and conspiracy. Please stand up." "I didn't know." Chloe shrieked as she was pulled to her feet, her resort robe hanging loosely off one shoulder, her bare feet dragging on the carpet. "I didn't know about the apartment. I didn't know about the 17th floor. Jared, tell them I didn't know." Jared didn't look at her. He didn't look at his parents. He looked at me, his face twisted into an ugly, venomous snarl. "You think you won?" he spat, his voice dripping with venom as the officers began to lead him toward the door. "You think you're smart, Fiona? You're nothing. You're a boring, miserable piece of wood. Nobody loves you. Nobody will ever love you." "I know," I said softly, looking him directly in the eyes. "But at least I'll be sleeping in my own bed tonight. Not a cell." He lunged toward me, but the officers easily held him back, shoving him out of the door and into the carpeted corridor. His screams of rage and panic echoed down the long, silent hallway of the Whispering Pines Resort, slowly fading as they reached the elevators. The door of room 608 slowly clicked shut, leaving the five of us in the quiet, ruined luxury of the suite. The half-empty champagne glass still sat on the entry table. The silver bowl of strawberries lay spilled on the floor, the red fruit scattered across the pristine carpet like drops of dried blood. Helen collapsed into one of the plush armchairs, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with deep, silent sobs. Arthur stood beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder, but his eyes were fixed on the floor, his face aged by 10 years in the span of 10 minutes. My mother walked over to me, wrapping her arms around me. I let myself sink into her embrace, the smell of her familiar lavender perfume finally breaking the cold, icy armor I had worn for the last 72 hours. I didn't cry, but I let my chest rise and fall with a deep, shuddering breath. My father walked over to Arthur. The two men, who had shared countless dinners, golf games, and family holidays, looked at each other. There was no anger between them now, only a profound, heavy sadness. "I am so sorry, John," Arthur said, his voice cracking, the proud executive completely broken. I don't know how he could." "It's not your fault, Arthur," my father said quietly, placing a hand on Arthur's arm. "You didn't make him a monster. He chose that path himself. We will cooperate with the police, Fiona," Arthur said, turning his heavy, tear-filled eyes toward me. "Every record, every account. Anything you need to clear your name and protect your firm. I will make sure he never gets a dime of our family's support for his defense. He will face this alone." "Thank you, Arthur," I said, pulling back from my mother's embrace. My voice was steady again, the strength returning to my limbs. "Let's get you home, sweetie," my mother whispered, wiping a tear from my cheek. "Let's leave this place." I looked around the room one last time. The rumpled bed, the spilled strawberries, the open balcony door letting in the cool, pine-scented mountain air. This was the place Jared had chosen to celebrate his new life with Chloe, built on the ashes of mine. I smiled, a real, genuine smile, for the first time in months. "Yes," I said. "Let's go home." Chapter 7. Reconstructing the Ledge. 3 months later, the spring air had transitioned into the heavy, golden warmth of midsummer. I stood on the balcony of my new apartment. It was on the 3rd floor of a quiet, low-rise brick building on the east side of the city. There was no 17-story drop, no concrete ledge to fear. Below my balcony was a small, shared courtyard filled with blooming hydrangeas and the quiet chatter of neighbors walking their dogs. The divorce had been finalized with an administrative speed that felt almost clinical, thanks to the overwhelming mountain of criminal evidence. Jared's defense team had tried to negotiate a plea deal, but with Arthur refusing to fund his legal fees, Jared had been assigned a public defender who quickly realized there was no defense to be made. The keylogger, the offshore accounts, the GPS tracker, and the testimony of a terrified Chloe, who had accepted a plea deal to testify against him, had sealed his fate. Jared was currently serving a 15-year sentence for grand larceny, identity theft, and attempted corporate fraud, with the conspiracy to commit murder charges still looming in a secondary federal trial. Chloe had received 5 years of probation and a heavy financial restitution fine, her career and reputation permanently ruined. I took a sip of my tea, feeling the warm, soothing liquid slide down my throat. Beside me on the iron patio table lay the small precision tool I had used to unscrew the back of my watch 3 months ago. Next to it was the watch itself, the elegant, silver timepiece Jared had given me. I had taken it to a jeweler, had the internal casing cleaned and repaired, and replaced the backplate with a new, unscratched piece of steel. I picked up the watch and strapped it onto my wrist. The weight of it felt different now. It was no longer a shackle, a silent eye tracking my every move. It was a trophy, a reminder of the day I refused to let them push me off the ledge. The watch ticked quietly against my skin, steady, constant, and entirely mine.